Ava was the kind of person most people forgot after meeting once. She never tried to get attention, never spoke loudly, never shared personal stories. She had recently joined a new company, and even though weeks had passed, her coworkers still knew almost nothing about her. She did her work quietly, stayed polite, and left on time. No rumors, no drama. To most people, she was just the new girl. One afternoon, during lunch break, her team decided to plan a group dinner. It was supposed to be a friendly welcome for Ava, but it was also a way for everyone to socialize outside of work. Someone casually asked her if she wanted to join, and to everyone's surprise, she said yes. It was the first time she agreed to something outside office hours. The night of the dinner came, and everyone gathered at a fancy restaurant. They sat around a long table laughing and chatting. A few people arrived late, but when Ava walked in, the room went quiet for a second. Not because of her appearance, but because of the cast on her right hand. Her arm was wrapped tightly from wrist to elbow, and she was holding it carefully. Most of them had never noticed the cast at work because she usually kept it covered with long sleeves. But now, under the restaurant lights, it was impossible to miss. Someone immediately joked, "Whoa, what happened? Did you try to open a pickle jar and lose the fight?" A few people laughed. Ava smiled slightly, not offended, just quiet. She simply replied, "Just an injury. It'll heal." She took her seat at the end of the table, calm and relaxed, not trying to attract any attention. But her silence made her stand out even more. Others were talking loudly, cracking jokes, taking selfies, calling the waiter repeatedly. But Ava just sat there, listening, not trying to join the spotlight. To them, she seemed fragile. A small woman with a broken hand, soft voice, and no big personality. The kind of person people assume is harmless, weak, maybe even scared of life. They didn't see her as someone who had lived through anything difficult. They just saw a quiet girl with a cast and assumed the rest of her was just as soft. But everyone at that table had the same thought. How did she even break her hand? She doesn't look like someone who does anything dangerous. They started guessing. Someone said maybe she slipped in the bathroom. Another said maybe she fell off a bicycle. Someone else joked she probably hurt herself doing laundry. To them, it was funny. To Ava, it was just noise. She didn't try to defend herself. She didn't correct anyone. She didn't even roll her eyes. She just let them talk. That calm silence made her seem even weaker in their eyes. They thought she had no confidence. They thought she was used to being talked over. What none of them knew was that the real reason she stayed quiet wasn't because she was weak. It was because she had been trained to stay silent. She had spent years learning how to speak only when necessary, how to hide information behind a neutral face, how to stay unnoticed. She wasn't shy. She wasn't scared. She was controlled. The dinner went on. People kept laughing louder, trying to impress each other. But deep down, there was something no one noticed. Ava was watching everything. The way people moved, the tone of their voices, who was showing off, who was insecure, who was pretending. She didn't react, but she observed with the kind of calm that comes from experience. Not office experience, but something heavier. She didn't need to prove anything to them. But soon, something would happen that would force the entire table to see her in a completely different way. For now, they thought the most interesting thing about her was the broken hand. They had no idea that the hand was the least important detail about her. They had no idea that the quietest person at the table was the only one who had ever lived through things they couldn't even imagine. And they definitely had no idea that one small mistake, a sleeve sliding down, would change the entire night. The mockery had already begun. But the silence before the truth was already in place. They thought she was just a normal woman with a broken hand. The jokes didn't stop after Ava sat down. In fact, the more people noticed how silent she was, the more they treated her like an easy target. Some people at the table were the loud, attention-seeking type, the kind who feel powerful only when they make someone else look small. And Ava, with her broken hand and calm face, seemed like the perfect person for them to tease. One of the men leaned forward and said loudly, "So, Ava, what happened? Did a kitten attack you?" The table laughed again. Someone else added, No, she probably hurt herself while scrolling on her phone too fast." More laughter. Ava just smiled politely, the kind of smile that hides everything. She didn't defend herself. She didn't explain. She didn't give them the story they wanted. She simply said, "It's fine. It was just an accident." Her voice was soft, but steady. The kind of voice that doesn't shake even under pressure. But that only annoyed them more. People like that aren't happy when someone stays calm. They want a reaction. They want a fight or embarrassment or anger, something emotional they can feed on. But Ava gave them nothing. She just sat there eating quietly, listening, observing. Every time they tried to make fun of her, it felt like they were punching air. Still, they kept going. One woman, trying to look smart in front of her friends, asked, "You don't look like someone who plays sports. So what did you do? Trip over your own shadow?" Another guy laughed and said, "Maybe she broke it writing emails too fast." Everyone enjoyed the joke. Everyone except one person at the table. There was an older man, ex-military, who didn't laugh. He had been watching Ava carefully. Something about her posture, her stillness, the way she didn't flinch. It didn't match the image of a weak woman. But he said nothing. He just kept observing. Meanwhile, the jokes got meaner. One guy raised his glass and said dramatically, "A toast to Ava, the brave warrior who survived paper cuts." The table roared with laughter. Ava didn't. Most people in her place would have snapped back by now. Maybe said something sarcastic, maybe walked out angry, maybe cried. But Ava stayed completely composed. Not a single emotion slipped. It almost made the others uncomfortable. Like they were expecting her to break, and she refused. And then, something happened that nobody noticed except Ava. A waiter came by carrying a tray full of glasses. Someone at the table, while joking and waving his hands around, suddenly bumped the waiter's arm. The tray tilted. The glasses began to fall. Before anyone could even gasp, Ava's left hand shot forward, fast, precise, and caught two of the falling glasses in midair. No hesitation, no panic, no wasted movement, pure reflex. It happened too quickly for most people to understand, but the ex-military man noticed. His eyes narrowed. People who move like that don't get that skill from office jobs. They get it from somewhere else, somewhere real. But the others, they just laughed again. Whoa, at least the other hand works. Maybe she used to be a magician. Careful, Ava. Don't break the good hand too. The mockery never stopped because they had no idea who they were talking to. They only saw what they wanted to see. A quiet woman, a broken hand, a soft smile. They didn't see the danger. They didn't see the years of training behind her silence. They didn't see the scars she wasn't showing. People judge based on surface, what they can see. But Ava was a reminder of something powerful. The most dangerous people don't always look dangerous. The strongest ones don't need to prove it. And the quiet ones are usually the ones with stories no one is ready to hear. While they kept laughing, Ava stayed calm, collecting every detail, every voice, every insult. Not because she was hurt, but because silence was part of her discipline. She wasn't staying quiet because she was weak. She was staying quiet because they weren't worth the truth. The dinner kept going. The jokes kept coming. And they still had no idea that one small moment later in the night would tear their confidence apart. They didn't know that their laughter would freeze in their throats. Because the moment her sleeve slipped, everything would change. The dinner continued, and the energy at the table shifted from friendly to competitive. The more the group drank, the louder they became. The same people who were laughing at Ava started trying to impress each other, especially the men. They began telling stories, not normal stories, but the kind that were meant to make them look brave, strong, or dangerous. One guy leaned back and said, "You know, back in college, I got into a fight with 3 guys at once. Broke one guy's nose with a single punch." He spoke like he was proud of it. His friends nodded, pretending to be impressed. Another guy jumped in, not wanting to be left behind. "That's nothing. I once threw a man over a bar counter because he tried to mess with me." He flexed his arm a little, as if the muscles could prove the story was true. Soon it became a competition, like a silent game of who's the toughest. Each man tried to top the one before him. A third man, already a little drunk, smirked and pointed at Ava. See, that's how real men fight. We don't end up breaking our own hands like that. The group laughed again, and once more, Ava didn't react. She was silent, but her eyes moved, slow, sharp, analyzing. She had seen this type of behavior many times before. Men who brag loudly to hide their insecurity. People who pretend to be strong because they have never actually faced real danger. She could read their body language easily. No scars, no discipline in posture, no awareness in their eyes. Just ego. Then one of them decided to get personal. He leaned forward, pretending to be playful, but his voice had a sting. So, Ava, what's the toughest thing you've ever done? Opened a heavy door. Another round of laughter. Ava didn't answer. She just looked at him. Not angry, not hurt, just looking. Her silence wasn't weak. It was unsettling. But instead of sensing that, he kept going. Come on, don't be shy. You must have one big story. Something dramatic. Something brave. Everyone turned to her, waiting. For the first time, Ava spoke more than 2 words. I don't talk about that part of my life, she said calmly. Some people shrugged. Some rolled their eyes. One woman whispered, she probably has nothing to tell. Another said, yeah, she broke her hand doing yoga. But the ex-military man at the table watched her very carefully. His instincts were alert now. He had seen that same calm silence in people who knew things they weren't allowed to say. Ava didn't look embarrassed. She looked trained. Meanwhile, the show-off stories continued. One guy said proudly, if someone ever tried to fight me, I'd destroy them. I've watched every UFC fight. I know how to handle myself. Another man added, bro, same. If some thief ever entered my house, I'd break his neck. Ava almost smiled, just a tiny smile. She'd heard this kind of talk before, from people who believed violence was a joke, a game, a performance. People who thought pain was something that happened only in movies. None of them understood that real violence is quiet, fast, final. One of the men suddenly turned the conversation to military topics. You know, I always thought about joining the army, he said, as if it were a hobby. But I don't like being ordered around. Plus, I'm too smart for that. The ex-soldier at the table raised an eyebrow, but stayed silent. Then someone pointed at Ava again. You ever do something like that? I mean, no offense, but you don't look like the type to survive boot camp. The table burst into laughter again. But this time, the ex-military man didn't laugh. He didn't know the full truth yet, but something inside him said, they are laughing at the wrong person. Ava still didn't respond. She didn't argue. She didn't explain. She just watched them. Every word, every gesture, every fake show of strength. To them, she seemed like an easy target. To her, they were children pretending to be wolves. What none of them understood was that she had lived through things no one at that table could even imagine. She had fought without cameras, bled without applause, survived without applause. She had seen people die. She had made decisions that replayed in her head at night. She had fought not for pride, but for orders, for mission, for necessity. While they bragged about bar fights, Ava had once stood silent in the dark, waiting for a signal that meant life or death. But she said nothing, because when someone knows what real danger feels like, they don't need to prove anything. And the louder the others bragged, the more obvious the truth became. The only person at that table who had ever faced real fear was the one they kept mocking. They didn't know it yet, but the night was about to flip, because very soon one tiny accident, one slip of a sleeve, would expose everything they never expected. And the toughest men at that table would go completely silent. The night went on, the jokes got louder, and the bragging continued. The people at the table were so busy trying to impress each other that no one noticed how still Ava remained. She didn't join their arguments, she didn't react to their insults, and she didn't even look offended. She simply observed, quiet, sharp, and unreadable. But everything changed in a single, simple moment. A waiter brought in hot dishes and placed them on the table. As Ava reached forward to move her plate, her shirt sleeve slid down just a little. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't intentional. It was just a small movement. But it was enough. For the first time that night, something other than her broken hand was visible. Right below her wrist, hidden under the sleeve, was a tattoo. But not a pretty, normal tattoo. Not a flower, not a quote, not a design you get at a regular shop. It was black, sharp, geometric, precise. A pattern of lines and shapes that didn't look artistic. They looked official. Like a stamp. A code. Most people didn't notice. One person laughed and said, "Oh look, she has a secret tattoo too? What is it? A butterfly." But one man, only one, froze completely. It was the ex-military guy at the table. His eyes widened. The fork in his hand stopped halfway to his mouth. He wasn't just curious, he was shocked. That mark wasn't random. He had seen something like it before. Not in public. Not on normal soldiers. It was the kind of tattoo given, not chosen. The kind that didn't belong to anyone except people who worked in places that technically don't exist. His heartbeat changed. His posture straightened. He whispered under his breath, "That can't be." Ava noticed his stare. For a split second, their eyes met. No one else at the table understood what was happening. But between the two of them, something silent passed. Recognition. He didn't ask loudly. He didn't joke. He leaned in slightly and asked her in a low voice, almost afraid of the answer. "Where did you serve?" The table went quiet. Not because they understood, but because they could feel something shift. Ava didn't panic. She didn't pull her sleeve back up quickly like someone hiding a lie. She just looked at him, calm and completely in control. Her answer was simple. "I can't talk about it." That sentence changed everything. Not, "I don't want to talk about it." Not, "It's personal." Not, "It's just a tattoo." She said can't, not won't. The difference was huge. Everyone else at the table went silent, confused. They didn't understand the meaning behind those words. But the man who asked understood perfectly. Only people with clearance levels, sealed missions, or classified identities use phrases like that. Only people with government silence contracts. Only people who have lived through things the public is not allowed to know. And suddenly, the room didn't feel the same anymore. The same people who were laughing minutes ago started staring at Ava differently. The joking tone was gone. Even the loudest guy, the one who mocked her the most, stopped talking. Because now, even without knowing the full truth, they sensed something. She wasn't weak. She wasn't soft. She wasn't breakable. She was trained. Not in a gym. Not in a bar fight. Not in some YouTube self-defense class. She was trained the way only black-budget operatives are trained, quiet, fast, hidden, and dangerous. The tattoo wasn't decoration. It was a warning. The whole table froze, not because they finally respected her, but because they finally realized they hadn't just been making fun of a woman with a broken hand. They had been laughing at someone who had survived things they would never understand. Someone who had seen real war, real missions, real danger. Someone who didn't answer questions. Because she wasn't allowed to. That one small moment, one glimpse of ink, silenced the entire room. The same people who thought they were strong suddenly felt small. And Ava? She didn't need to say anything else. Her silence finally made sense. Her calm finally had a reason. And the broken hand wasn't the story anymore. The tattoo was. And the truth? They were sitting at dinner with someone they should have never underestimated. The room was no longer filled with laughter. The jokes, the bragging, the teasing, everything stopped. It was as if someone had pressed pause on the evening. The people who just minutes ago were laughing at Ava now sat frozen, staring at her arm, replaying everything they had said. The ex-military man was the only one brave enough to speak. His voice was low, steady, and respectful. Very different from the tone everyone else had used with her all night. He leaned forward slightly and asked, "That tattoo? It's not random, is it?" Ava looked at him calmly. She didn't look scared. She didn't look proud. And she didn't look angry. She just looked still, like someone who had been through moments much heavier than this one. She shook her head slowly. "No, it isn't." The man nodded, understanding more than the others. He didn't push, didn't force questions, didn't try to act smart. But the rest of the table? They were confused. They didn't understand what was happening, but they could feel that something serious had entered the room. One of the women whispered, "What does that even mean? It's just a tattoo, right?" The ex-soldier replied softly, "No, not that one." His eyes stayed on Ava. "That mark doesn't come from a normal place. You don't choose it. You're given it." That made everyone tense. The loudest guy at the table, the one who bragged about fake fights and made the biggest jokes, forced a laugh. "Come on, man. You're acting like she's some kind of spy." Nobody laughed with him. Ava finally spoke. Her voice was gentle, but it carried weight. "I sign things I can't unsign. I went places I can't mention. The tattoo isn't supposed to be seen." Silence. Her words weren't dramatic. She didn't say she was a hero. She didn't say she saved lives. She didn't even try to prove anything. She just stated a fact. A fact heavy enough to crush every insult they had thrown at her earlier. The same people who mocked her broken hand were now staring at her like they were sitting next to a ghost. Someone who had lived a life they couldn't even imagine. Someone finally spoke, voice shaky. "So, the hand, how did it really break?" Ava looked down at her cast for a moment, then spoke without emotion. "During an extraction. No details. No story. No names. Just 2 words. But those 2 words were enough for the ex-military man to understand everything. Extraction missions don't mean rescue like in movies. They mean classified removal. High risk. High tension. No mistakes allowed." Suddenly, the broken hand didn't look weak anymore. It looked like a scar from a world none of them had ever touched. The loudest man, the one who insulted her the most, stared at his plate, finally realizing how foolish he had been. All his fake stories about bar fights meant nothing now. Ava didn't look at him with anger or revenge. She didn't want to embarrass anyone. She just existed in her truth, and her truth was enough to overpower the entire room. The ex-soldier finally said what everyone else was thinking. "We owe you an apology." Ava didn't respond. She didn't need praise. She didn't need respect. She didn't even need them to understand. She had seen lives end. She had seen missions fail. She had watched people scream in silence. She had walked away from things that left marks deeper than ink. And now, she sat at a dinner table full of people who thought pain was a joke. The quiet person they made fun of was someone who had been trained to stay calm under fire, to stay silent under pressure, to keep secrets buried even when questioned. The laughter was gone. The bragging was gone. In its place was something new. Fear. Respect. Realization. They finally understood what the ex-soldier had sensed earlier. Ava wasn't quiet because she was shy. She was quiet because she had lived through things that didn't fit inside casual conversation. Her broken hand wasn't a sign of weakness. It was a reminder of something she survived. And that tattoo wasn't art. It was proof. Proof that while they were laughing and showing off fake strength, she had already lived through the real thing, and she was still here. A heavy silence settled over the table, the kind that couldn't be broken by a joke or a casual sentence. Everyone sat frozen, still trying to process what Ava had just said. Only a few minutes ago, they were laughing at her, mocking her, treating her like she was fragile. Now, every person at the table was looking at her differently, carefully, cautiously, almost as if she might explode if they said the wrong thing. Ava didn't seem affected by the change in their attitude. She wasn't enjoying the sudden respect, and she wasn't angry about the earlier jokes. She looked exactly the same as before, calm, still unreadable. But now, instead of thinking she was weak, they were finally starting to see something else. She was dangerous in a way they had never considered. Someone finally gathered the courage to speak. "If you don't mind, what kind of mission was it?" the woman across from her asked gently. Ava didn't look offended or irritated. She just answered honestly. "I can't share details. It was classified," she said, the same way someone else might say, "I forgot my umbrella." The ex-military man nodded slowly. He understood. Classified meant sealed forever. Not just secret, untouchable. But then Ava added something no one was expecting. The hand wasn't supposed to break. Something went wrong. Someone didn't make it back. Her voice didn't shake. Her face didn't change. But the way she said someone didn't make it back. It was heavy. Not like guilt, not like sadness, but like a memory she had learned to carry without breaking. The table stayed silent. No one dared to speak. Because now, the broken hand wasn't funny anymore. Now it wasn't a joke. Now it was evidence not of clumsiness but of loss, risk, and survival. The loudest man at the table, the one who claimed he could break someone's nose in a fight, stared at his drink, his pride completely gone. He realized there was a difference between pretending to be tough and having survived something real. And he wasn't on the winning side of that comparison. Ava continued quietly, "When you work in places that don't exist on paper, things are different. You don't get medals. You don't get public credit. You don't get to tell your story. You just finish the mission and disappear." The room felt smaller now, like the air was heavier. They weren't just looking at a woman with a tattoo anymore. They were looking at someone who had lived in a world that wasn't meant to be talked about. The girl sitting next to her finally whispered, "So, you're not allowed to tell anyone?" Ava shook her head. "No, not even my family. Not even the people I used to work with. Once you leave everything." There was no anger in her voice. No bitterness. It was just the truth. She wasn't hiding a past because she was ashamed. She was hiding it because it was part of a world built on silence. Then the ex-soldier said something the others didn't expect. "You didn't lose your strength when your hand broke," he said quietly. "You used it." Ava looked at him for a moment and nodded softly. That was the first time anyone had spoken to her like they understood. She wasn't broken. She was the reason someone else lived longer than they were supposed to. One woman finally spoke, voice shaky. "You could have told us earlier." Ava looked at her. Not angry, not emotional, just honest. "And what would it have changed? You would have treated me differently because you were impressed, not because you respected me." Her words were simple, but they hit the entire table harder than any insult could. Because she was right. If she had shown the tattoo earlier, they wouldn't have seen Ava the person, they would have seen Ava the mystery. And the truth was not something she used to gain attention. She wasn't silent because she wanted to hide. She was silent because she didn't need their approval. She had already done more in one mission than most of them would do in their whole lives. And now, sitting in a restaurant full of wine glasses and small talk, she looked like the strongest one there, even with a broken hand. Everyone had spent the whole night trying to look powerful. But the real power had been sitting quietly the entire time. No loud voice, no ego, no need to prove anything. She didn't need to show strength. Her life had already tested it. And she passed. The air in the dining hall felt different after Amelia's revelation. The tattoo wasn't just a mark on her skin anymore. It was like a silent message that everyone had heard without words. The people who were laughing before now stared at her like they had seen a ghost. Even the man who cracked jokes earlier didn't dare breathe loudly. The room wasn't just quiet, it was frozen. But Amelia didn't react to any of it. She simply continued eating with her injured hand, as if nothing had changed. That calmness scared them more than anything else. The senior officer, Colonel Reeves, was the first to move. He didn't speak loudly. He didn't shout. He just said one sentence, and it was enough to make everyone's heart stop. "Who gave you permission to open that file?" he asked the young soldier who had exposed the tattoo. The soldier's face turned pale because he realized his mistake was not small. It was the kind of mistake that could end careers. He stuttered an apology, but Reeves didn't even look at him. His eyes were on Amelia. Reeves slowly walked closer, like someone approaching a wild animal. Not out of fear, but out of respect. He stopped beside Amelia's chair and said quietly, "Ma'am, we didn't know." That one word, "ma'am," shocked everyone. They had seen this man command troops, punish officers, and yell at generals. But now he was speaking to Amelia like she outranked him. Amelia finally looked up, but her face was neutral. "You weren't supposed to know," she replied. The soft tone of her voice made it even more powerful. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She wasn't trying to scare them. She was just stating a fact. Reeves nodded, and something in his expression showed he understood her message. Some truths are not meant for open rooms. People at the table slowly processed what was happening. Soldiers who mocked her now looked down at their plates, embarrassed. Some were shaking slightly. They knew that a Blacksite tattoo wasn't a decoration. It meant she had clearance above theirs, missions above their pay grade, and authority they didn't even know existed. Someone tried to break the silence by whispering, "Who is she really?" But no one answered, because now they were afraid that even asking could be considered a violation. That was the power of secrecy. It created fear without needing threat. Then the medical officer, who had treated her hand earlier, suddenly spoke up. "Why didn't you tell us?" he asked softly. It wasn't rude. It was a human question. Amelia glanced at him, and for the first time, a tiny smile appeared. "Because I don't use my past to get respect," she said. "Either people show it on their own, or they lose the right to give it." The doctor nodded, understanding the weight in her words. But others didn't feel relief. They felt guilt because they weren't just disrespectful, they were blind. They judged her by a broken hand, by simple clothes, by the way she sat alone, not realizing she had lived through things far beyond their imagination. Reeves gently took a step back, then stood at attention. To everyone's shock, he raised his hand and saluted her. A colonel, saluting a woman they all thought was weak. And he did it with full honor. That salute was louder than any speech. The room held its breath again. Nobody could avoid the truth anymore. She wasn't just someone with a broken hand. She was someone who had been places most of them would never even know existed. Then something unexpected happened. The soldier who made fun of her earlier stood up, walked toward her, and without saying a word, placed his plate in front of her. A silent gesture of apology. Others followed. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. It was real. Apologies without words. Guilt without excuses. Amelia looked at them, then said something they didn't expect. "I don't need your sorry," she said calmly. "Just don't forget how fast you judged a person you knew nothing about." Those words hit harder than any punishment. And she wasn't angry. She was tired. Tired of hiding. Tired of pretending. Tired of being misjudged by people who had no idea who she was or what she had survived. The room didn't stay frozen anymore. It melted into silence, but a respectful one. Not forced. Not scared. Just honest respect. And for the first time, most of them realized something deep. Power isn't always loud, and the strongest people rarely show their strength first. Amelia finished her food, stood up slowly, and walked out. No one tried to stop her. No one dared. Because now they understood. She wasn't someone you invited into your respect. She was someone you earned the right to stand beside. And the most unforgettable part was this. She didn't need them to know who she was. They needed to know. After Amelia left the dining hall, the room stayed silent for a long time. Nobody wanted to be the first one to talk, because whatever they said would feel too small after what just happened. The same soldiers who laughed at her a few minutes ago now looked at the door like they had just watched a legend walk out. But Amelia didn't look back even once. She didn't need to. The lesson was already printed inside their minds. Outside, the hallway was quiet. Amelia walked slowly, her hands still in a bandage, but her steps were steady. She wasn't angry. She wasn't hurt. She was simply done. She had seen this pattern many times. People judged her for being quiet, for being small, for being alone. But every time, the truth eventually came out. And every time, the same people who mocked her ended up respecting her more than anyone else in the room. She walked to the base exit where a black SUV was already waiting. A driver stepped out, stood straight, and opened the door for her. No questions. No hesitation. He knew who she was. He knew her level. He knew why silence was safer than conversation. Before entering, Amelia turned her head slightly. Through the glass of the dining hall, she could see faces still frozen with shock. She didn't smile, but she didn't feel cold either. She just accepted reality. Some people only understand respect after they experience fear. Inside the SUV, she finally allowed herself to relax. The driver handed her a sealed envelope. She opened it. Inside was a single note. Operation Black Veil reactivated. Your presence is required. Level 7 clearance confirmed. There was no signature. There never was. Classified missions had no names, only instructions. Her eyes didn't even blink. She wasn't surprised. She knew this day would come again. She just didn't expect it to be so soon. Back at the base, whispers had already started. Some soldiers tried to search for her name in the military database, but nothing showed up. That made them even more nervous. Others kept replaying the moment in their heads. The tattoo, the salute, the change in the colonel's voice. One of them finally said the truth out loud. She wasn't just a soldier. She was something above us. And suddenly, the broken hand didn't look like weakness anymore. It looked like survival. Colonel Reeves stayed behind after everyone left. He knew exactly who Amelia was, but even he only knew pieces of her record. Her missions were sealed under codes, her files were restricted by clearance most humans would never touch. But he remembered one thing. The last time someone with that tattoo appeared, an entire hostage crisis ended in 17 minutes, without a single bullet fired. And no one ever found out how. He picked up the empty cup she left behind on the table and stared at it, almost like it was evidence of something unreal. Then he said to himself, I hope we never need her again. But if we do, God help whoever stands against her. Amelia's ride moved through the night. The base grew smaller behind her. The laughter they once threw at her was now buried under fear, respect, and curiosity. She didn't hate them. She never did. She simply understood them. Ordinary minds fear what they don't understand. As the SUV drove toward a hidden runway, Amelia looked at her bandaged hand. Still hurt, but she smiled lightly. Pain was nothing new to her. Pain was just a reminder she was still alive. And as long as she was alive, she had a mission. A jet was waiting for her. Black, unmarked, silent. A man in a suit greeted her with a nod. Welcome back, Agent Shadow. That was her real name in the classified world. Not Amelia. Not the woman with the broken hand. Not the quiet lady sitting alone. She was one of the few agents who existed only in spoken files, never written ones. As she stepped into the jet, she thought of the dining hall again. She didn't know if she would ever return to that base. But she knew one thing. The people in that room would never forget her. Not because she showed power, but because she didn't show it until they forced her to. The aircraft door closed. The engines roared quietly. The world outside faded, and a new operation began. Somewhere far away, another group of people would underestimate her. And once again, they would learn the same truth. Real strength doesn't need to be loud. Real power doesn't warn before it acts. And the most dangerous people in the world are the ones you never see coming.